All right, so today's lesson video is going to be over a brief introduction of the debate event called Public Forum. This is the event that we're going to do here in class primarily for the next couple of months, largely because I think it is the debate event that sort of covers the most bases, is most broadly appealing. Like I said, we talked last time. There's 5 or 6 different debate events. We're sort of choosing to focus in on one as a means to learn how to debate, and so that's what we're going to do in here for pretty much through about November, basically. And so, public forum, we're going to do a brief background of sort of what it is and then the different types of speeches, a very, very brief overview. We will have lessons more in depth on each one of those speeches later on in the month, maybe early next month. But this is just going to be a very sort of brief overview. So, the event of public forum, we're going to sort of do this temporally. So, we're going to start sort of before the round, kind of what happens, before we ever even get to a debate tournament. Like most debate events, the national organization, the NSDA, will set a topic for the entire country to debate. Public forum, initially, it's about a little more than 20 years old as an event now. It started in 2003, the 2002-2003 academic year. Initially, the topic for PF changed every single month. So there was a September topic, an October topic, November, December, so on and so forth. That has a slight modification now. They mush September and October together because most people generally don't do the first couple of weekends of September. And so instead of having a topic for only like 2 weeks of September, they just did a topic for like 6 weeks of the last end of September and October. Same thing for November and December. Nobody's in school the Thanksgiving weekend. Usually the last 2 weekends of December, everybody's out of school for break. So instead of having like a 2-week long December topic, they just mush November and December together. In second semester, it is every month. There's a January topic, a February topic, a March topic, an April topic, and then a nationals topic as well. And so we have a total of like 6 or 7 different resolutions that we'll debate throughout the year. You can see up on the board in class, the one we're doing for September, October of this year is resolved. The United Kingdom should rejoin the European Union. The way this works, there is a topic committee actually that sort of puts together potential topics sort of over the summer, and then people get to vote on them. You'll actually get to vote about a month beforehand. So if you are NSDA members, if you have 25 NSDA points, you will actually get a vote for the November-December topic. That voting would take place at the end of September, actually. On October 1st, the November-December topic will be announced. So everything comes out 1 month beforehand. And for each of those sort of different topic cycles, there's 2 choices. Coaches and students around the country get to vote, and that's how we decide which topic we have. So that's sort of beforehand. Then you've got like a month to prepare if you wanted to for the first tournament on a topic. Sort of starts the first weekend of a month. But let's say what happens before a round when you get to a tournament itself. You're assigned, you signed a round, you're going to room, like 1702, and you're debating against a team from this particular school or whatever it is. Before the round in public forum, you will have a coin flip. You generally will not know when you walk into a round, when you are assigned a round, whether you are affirmative or negative. There will be a coin flip beforehand. In general, that is now done on on Tabroom, the sort of website that does all this stuff that we'll go through a little more in detail later. Like when the pairing comes out, maybe 5 minutes later, it will auto coin flip and say, this team has won the coin flip. You have 5 minutes to choose. And the options that you have, this is very similar to the coin flip before like a football game. You do a coin flip before a football game, you can choose whether to kick or receive or which end zone to defend. And then whichever team picks the first one, the other team gets to pick the other option. Same thing happens here. In public forum, the options are do you want to be affirmative or negative on the topic? Or do you want to speak first or second? So if we win the flip and we choose to go AF, the other team's like, cool, we're going to go second. And so it ends up being AF first, neg second. It could be the other way around. It could be negative first, AF second. This is the only event where the negative team could conceivably go first, which is why sort of in the SPAR debates I've been talking about, crossfire begins by the side that speaks first, because it's possible that neg might go first in a lot of your public forum rounds. You'll see this referred to as AF or neg, pro or con. I usually refer to them as AF or neg, but I think officially it's pro and con according to NSDA, but it doesn't really matter. And so this coin flip will happen before every single round. Even if you've debated that team already in the tournament, you still have a coin flip. That's at least according to NSDA rules. Up until this year, there was an exception, though. The California State High School Speech Association, CHASA, the body that governs speech and debate in California, for our local and state tournament, they would assign you sides. AF always went first and NEG always went second. However, at this summer's meeting, they finally, after 2 decades, eventually aligned with the NSDA rules. And now, even in local CHASA tournaments, like our local TCFL tournaments in a CHASA state, it should be a coin flip before every round. There is still one organization that I know of, the National Catholic Forensic League, or the CFL, that assigns AF first, NEG second, but that is becoming increasingly rare and hopefully is not something you have to deal with any longer. All right, so that's before the round. The question is, what happens during the round? What we've got right here is a generalized overview of like the different speeches in public forum. Remember, you've got 2 people on each team. What I have here, just as a delineation, in each pair, so one team is going to be blue, one team's going to be red on here. The speakers will be the same. Well, speakers are designated as well. So like the first speaker is underlined. You can also see which things they participate in. Anything that's underlined, the first speakers go in. Anything that's italicized, the second speakers go in. So everybody in a public forum round speaks twice, and everybody participates in 2 questioning periods. So the basic sort of format here, each side gets a 4-minute speech at the beginning called the constructive. For the purposes of this discussion, we'll just say the coin flip ended up AF going first, NEG going second, just to keep it simple. But know that it's possible a coin flip could mean NEG first, AF second. But for the purposes of our conversation, we'll just say AF first. So like AF side gets up, has a 4-minute speech. NEG side stands up and has a 4-minute speech. Then those first speakers, all the underlined speakers here in this little version, have themselves a 3-minute questioning period, just like you've done in SPAR. 3 minutes, free for all, side that goes first, ask the first question. After that, sort of back and forth, right? So the first 2 speeches and crossfire, kind of like the beginning of a SPAR round, just a little bit longer. Then the second speakers go. It goes in the exact same order. So in this particular round we're talking about, AF won the flip and ended up first. So the second speaker for the first speaking team, they give a rebuttal. Then the second speaker for the second speaking team gives a 4-minute long rebuttal. Then those 2 second speakers, our italicized speakers on this little one we've got here, they have themselves a crossfire. So at this point, everyone has had a 4-minute long speech and everyone has had a 3-minute long questioning period. Then we sort of repeat again. Like I said, everybody gets a total of 2 speeches. So we go the exact same order. The first speaker from the first speaking team gets the summary speech, a 3-minute long speech that does a little more than summarize. We'll talk about it a little more in a sec. They stand up, give their speech, sit down. First speaker for the other team stands up, gives a 3-minute speech. Then we have something that is unique to public forum, and it is called the grand crossfire. For some students, it is actually the thing they enjoy the most. The grand crossfire is another 3-minute long open questioning period, back and forth. Either side can ask or answer. But instead of between just 2 speakers, it's between all 4 competitors in the round. And this one is actually done seated. Everything else, you're standing, just like we've done in class in SPAR. This one, however, you're seated, partly because the first couple of years, when all 4 folks were standing, not common, very, very rare, but did happen. Sometimes it came to physical blows. And so after about 2 years, they put in the rules that the grand crossfire is supposed to be seated to try and keep please don't get in fist fights. It's bad. So first speakers have each given a 3-minute long summary. Then we've got the 3-minute long grand crossfire where all 4 speakers get to go. Then the second speakers for each team get their sort of last speech. And in public forum, we call that set of last speeches the final focus. First speaking team gives a 2-minute final focus. Second speaking team gives a 2-minute final focus. And then the round is done. So the first speakers get a total of 7 minutes of speaking time across 2 speeches. The second speakers give a total of 6 minutes of speaking time across the 2 speeches. Those times have changed over the years. It used to be 2-minute summaries and 1-minute final focuses way back in the day. It's evolved. For the last 10 years, it's basically been this. The other thing that each team gets is they get 3 minutes of prep time that they can use throughout the round. Like, let's say that you are this first the second speaker giving the rebuttal, this like blue rebuttal right here, right? The second speaker for the first team, in this case, we'll say it's F, and you've just heard the other team's arguments. You aren't quite ready to go when this crossfire is done. Each team has a total of 3 minutes that they can divvy up throughout the round. You might take a minute or two here before you stand up and give that speech. Whatever you take out of that sort of pool. Let's say you take a minute and a half. That would mean you'd have a minute and a half left you could use at some point in time or a couple of points in time throughout the rest. So each team basically gets like 3 minutes worth of timeout. The only thing is that can only happen between speeches. You can't like take timeout during speeches. So that is like to prepare to give a speech. We'll talk later. There's a couple of like ideal times to take prep. I'm not going to get into that now. We'll do that when we get a little bit later. So each person gets 2 speeches. Each person participates in 2 questioning, one with just one other person, and one as part of the all 4 of you thing. Yep. And each team gets a total of 3 minutes of prep. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to dive in and do a brief sort of discussion of what each of these sets of speeches is like, and a little bit of what the crossfire is supposed to be. So first up, we're going to start with the constructives. So these are the first speakers of each team. These speeches are each maximum of 4 minutes long. You don't have to take the full time, but for this one in particular, we definitely suggest that you do. Part of it is because this is going to be pre-written. What you will generally have here is you will have a case. You will have a pre-written speech for this particular set of speeches. And we call those a case, where you might outline like 2 or 3 big major reasons why to support your side of the resolution. And it's going to be kind of big arguments. Usually it's kind of a logical chain of like, my first major argument is this, sort of A leads to B leads to C, and here's why that's bad. Now, my second major argument is this. A leads to B leads to C, and here's why that's bad. It's kind of a logical link chain of a couple different reasons why the judge should support your side of the topic. I'll show you an example. I'm going to post an example of this. I can't put it in the video here, sadly. But if you want to, you can link on it. You can see some examples of some old cases. And when we, probably in about another week or so, when we start diving into the constructive more in detail and we go over the cases, I'll show you sort of how these things are read. These usually include a couple different things. Sometimes they'll include some arguments that are called observations or some framework, basically of like, here's a big picture idea of maybe what we think some of the words in the resolution might mean. For example, one of the ones I think we had automatically in one of the SPAR debates, maybe you might define what automatically means if you need to do that. Or maybe you might define what the most important sort of impact or big issue in the round is before that would apply to everything. 9 times out of 10, you don't see these like observations or framework arguments, but you might see them sometimes before they get into the main portion of what the constructive is, and that's the contentions. These are like 3 big major, like 2 to 3 big major arguments in favor of your side of the topic. And so this is always going to be supported with evidence. We'll actually read direct text from evidence as opposed to paraphrasing. This is sort of what we lay out ahead of time. It's basically, we're going to build our case. We're going to build our 2 or 3 big major points in favor of the judge voting for our side of the resolution. And so, yeah, if you are the second constructive, you don't. So if you are like the one here that is in red, so if this is you going second right here, you do not need to attack the case in front of you generally. Each side basically builds their cases, and then it is the next set of speeches where the attacking of those cases begin. As far as how to do this well, this one you will have beforehand. You may have your cases a couple weeks beforehand. You should be really prepared at this. You should know it well, be really persuasive. You should know what's in there because you're going to have to answer questions about it. One of the big things that first speakers, one of their main jobs is to be really good in that first opening set of questions, in that first crossfire, and knowing your arguments are really important in that. And so having the time to kind of understand everything that's in there, really, really good. All right. Now we're going to do the second set of speeches, the rebuttals. So this is the second speaker for each team. Just like the constructives, these are 4 minutes long, and these are done by the second speaker. It goes in the same order. The team that spoke first for the constructives also speaks first for the rebuttals. The main purpose here, the purpose for the constructives, makes sense, is to build, construct. The main purpose of the rebuttals is to rebut or to attack or to answer. Basically, you're an attack dog in here, right? The other team has made 2 or 3 arguments in their case. Your job is to go down through and rip that other team's case apart point by point. What we use to do that are things called blocks. We do our best to anticipate what arguments the other side might make. We will put together a list of like the 10 to 15 what we think are going to be the most common arguments each side is going to have. And then we put together answers to each of those. So if they say the economy is the reason we should do it, we have answers to those economy arguments. If they say we should do the topic because it deters a Russia invasion, we have answers to that Russia invasion. We try and do our best guess of what those arguments might be and put together evidenced answers to those, like 2 or 3 reasons why the economy argument isn't true, or 2 or 3 reasons why the Russia argument isn't true. And we have a big giant list of those. You're not going to use all of them. You're only going to use the 2 or 3 blocks to the arguments that your opponents make, but you've got a big list of blocks in case somebody comes up with something, you've got some answers to it. One of the big things that you need to make certain and do is you need to make certain and not drop an argument. This is a concept that is going to be super important in debate. In general, if a team makes an argument, your obligation as the other side is to answer that argument in the next available speech, with the exception of that second constructive that I talked about. But like your job is, if somebody makes an argument, you need to respond to it in the next time around. Because if you don't, it's considered to be dropped. The idea is that if you don't answer an argument, I guess that argument must be true. And so if you don't answer an argument, from the constructive in the rebuttal, the next time you have the chance to answer it, the other side can come up and say, they didn't answer our argument. From that point forward in the debate round, this argument is assumed to be true. They can't bring it up later. The reason why we do that is if you could just not answer things in the next speech and just wait until later on in the round to do it, everybody would just answer things in the very last speech of the debate. Honestly, the team that goes second would just win every debate. And so that's why we sort of have this generally, I won't call it a rule, it is a generally accepted norm in debate, and there are reasons for that like you have to answer something in the next available speech, otherwise it's assumed to be true. Sometimes it'll be referred to as like silence is compliance. The analogy everybody makes is like, this argument's just like a raw egg. If you drop an egg and it breaks, you can't pick it back up again. You have to like do it right there. And so once you drop an argument, you can't pick it back up again, which is a big thing, right? So generally, your approach here for rebuttal is to attack, to just go through one by one, nitpick each of those arguments the other team makes and they're constructed. A little bit more advanced, second rebuttal. So our person here in red, our second speaker for the second speaking team. In more advanced rounds, they have an obligation to not only attack the other team's case, but to also begin rebuilding their own case from the attacks that have come just before then. We'll talk more about this when we get into the constructive lecture itself in like another couple of weeks. But this makes it a little more difficult. And this is also where you begin to kind of narrow down the round. You might have had 2 or 3 arguments, 2 or 3 reasons. That second that second rebuttal here, you kind of focus the round in a little bit. And we'll talk a little more of that in the summary. As far as the keys to success for this, right? 1, you need to be organized. You need to keep things very clear, know which arguments you're attacking, which ones you're not, because you don't want to drop things. That's the others. You need to put answers on every major argument out there. Don't leave a major argument uncovered. It's the equivalent of like if you're in a football field and leave a wide receiver covered on one side of the field, chances are the quarterback's going to throw that receiver the ball and they're going to score a touchdown. You need to put an answer on everything. You need to put a defender on each of the wide receivers to make certain they don't easily score a touchdown, right? Also, this speech becomes a little more difficult because you have to manage your time. You might have a bunch of answers. You maybe can't make all of them in 4 minutes. And so keeping an eye on that clock is super important. And the last thing is don't forget your case. Your partner has some really awesome arguments. You will have the ability to do the word that's underlined up here a little bit above. You'll have the ability to cross apply some answers. Maybe your partner's case answers part of the other team's arguments. Reference your partner's case. Hey, my partner already came up with an answer to this. Apply that here to their argument. We call that cross applying. It is sort of efficient and makes it easier for you to do a lot of things. We'll oftentimes build a lot of answers into the cases so you can just like use the case to respond to things and only have to bring up new evidence if it's stuff that the case doesn't already answer. So at this point, everybody's given a speech. Everybody's given constructive. First speakers have built their arguments with a couple key arguments. Second speakers have then come up and essentially attacked the other side's arguments in the rebuttals. Now we're going to go to that third set of speeches, the summary speeches. Summaries are done by the first speaker. So this is the first speaker's second speech. The summaries are 3 minutes long. The major purpose of this is where you make choices. You have 16 minutes of argumentation that's happened. 4 4-minute speeches so far, right? You can't go over everything in just 3 minutes. You simply don't have enough time. What you have to do is narrow the round down. Each side might have made 3 or 4 big major arguments. You probably can't focus in on all of those. The idea is to pick the best 1 or 2 for each side and address those. It is narrow down the round, get rid of the excess stuff. If you see arguments, some arguments are better than others. Why spend time on the less good arguments that you're trying to make? Spend your time on the more important, the better ones, the ones that are more likely to win you that round. And so what these summary speeches do is you essentially pick the parts of your case that you think are the most important and rebuild those from the attacks that happened in the rebuttal just before you. And sometimes we'll have what we call front lines for this. Debate oftentimes is like a game of chess. You will think 3 or 4 or 5 moves ahead of like, if we do this, then they're likely to do that. And then we can respond with this. And then they'll respond with that. And then we can respond with this, right? Like you think multiple moves ahead. The front lines are, here's our case. Here's what we think are the most likely answers to our case. Front lines are the, how do we deal with each of those likely answers to our case? Sort of thinking 2 steps ahead. And sometimes you'll write those down beforehand. Sometimes you have to come up with on the top of your head. But what it is you pick like the best parts of your case, deal with the other team's answers to those, so that way your case is still standing at the end of your speech. This is where the round gets a little harder, a lot more stuff to deal with, beginning to have less and less time. Sort of the key to success here is you need to be efficient. You could take 16 minutes to cover 16 minutes of arguments, but you don't have that luxury. It's about getting the important bits of the round in just 3 minutes. And so it is about being efficient. It is about making good choices. You need to answer the other team's rebuttal. Don't just repeat your case. You need to address the other team's responses to your case. Just repeating your case and ignoring those answers to your case is what's called extending through ink. We'll talk about what that means when we get to the flow. That's a bad thing. It means you haven't responded to their attacks, which means their attacks still stand. So you need to address each of their attacks on the parts of your case that you think are most important and the judge should evaluate on. And then the last thing you want to do is about prioritizing. This is about knowing what's important and what's not. In general, this requires having a big picture view of the debate, recognizing that some arguments are important, some arguments are less important, and focusing in on those more important ones and letting the less important ones kind of go away because they're probably not going to matter that much in the round. The last set of speeches. So we've got first speakers done constructives, second speakers done rebuttals, first speakers come back and done summaries. Now is the last set of 2 speeches. This is the last speech by the second speakers for each team, and this we call the final focus. This is done by the second speakers. These speeches are 2 minutes long. This goes by super duper quickly. All right. The first couple times you do it, you'll have trouble filling it. But after about a month, 2 minutes will go by very quickly and it will barely be enough. It requires you to be super efficient, right? Your job here, if you remember one word from this, your job is to compare. Remember, job for the constructive is to build. The job for the rebuttal is to attack. The job for the summary is to choose. The job for the final focus is to compare. Once you've picked your key argument and they've picked their key argument, this last speech is for the judge comparing why the judge should prefer the argument that you've picked as opposed to the argument they've picked. Of telling me why yours is more important than theirs, why yours makes more of a difference than theirs. The fancy term we'll call this is comparing impacts, why yours is more beneficial for more people than theirs. And it is that comparison. You have to piggyback off of what your partner does in the summary. You can't compare an argument that your partner in the summary hasn't chosen. Your partner picks which arguments you want, or your argument chooses the arguments you want to focus in on. Your job then is to compare those arguments that have been chosen. But if you two are on different sort of wavelengths where your partner picks one thing, but you want to compare something else, those don't match up. That's bad, right? And so this is where you're going to weigh impacts, do comparison. Sometimes we call this impact calculus or impact weighing. Literally what you're going to do is you're going to spell out to the judge why they should vote for your chosen argument over theirs. We sometimes refer to this as writing the ballot for the judge. Don't let the judge think. You want to have a nice, quick, clean sum up of hey, here's the reason you don't like their argument. Here's the reason you do prefer ours. That's why you vote for us. Keys to this, you want to compare those impacts. It's about that side-by-side comparison. It's not just talking about your thing. It requires talking about the other team's thing as well and doing that comparing or weighing. It is a higher order thinking skill. It is tough. You also need to make certain and be in line with your partner. You have to build off of your partner's summary. You can't just compare new things. It has to be something your partner's kind of picked. And lastly, this is the last chance you have. This is the last opportunity you've got to make your point. So it's all about being persuasive. It's the last chance. Sell it to that judge. Really do a great job of bringing it on home, bring some of that passion, give some of that emotion, that pathos in, and really sell that last shot you've got to the judge. So the quick review before we go into Crossfire. Basic job, constructive. Job is to build. Rebuttal. Job is to attack. Summary. Job is to make choices. And the final focus, the job is to compare those choices. Last little bit we've got here is Crossfire. Each team has a total of, there are 3 Crossfires in the round. Each person participates in 2. Basic purpose of a Crossfire is set up your partner for the next speech. Your job is to ask questions that are going to make it easier for your partner to do their job in the next speech. Basically, your job as a setter on a volleyball team, right? The basic rules of it, very similar to what we did in SPAR. Both sides can ask and answer. The side that goes first gets to ask the first question. After that, it's kind of a free-for-all. You want to try and keep it sort of calm. Don't turn it into a shouting match if you can avoid it. I will say, for inexperienced judges, for parents who've never seen debate rounds before, what we call lay judges is the term for that. For those, Crossfire is often the most important part of the round because it is the only times when they get to see the two sides directly interact. For more experienced judges, they kind of tune out Crossfire. What matters to them is the speeches. Again, you'll approach debates differently depending upon who is in the back of the room. First Crossfire, your job is to kind of clearly identify what your opponent's arguments are so that your partner knows exactly what it is they are attacking. If your partner is I don't know what their second contention is, your job in First Crossfire is to make certain that it's clear. So your partner's oh, I get it. Okay, now I know how to answer it. If your partner doesn't know what they're attacking in their rebuttal, it makes it really hard to attack something, right? Second Crossfire, this is for the second speakers. Your job is to make it super clear what arguments your opponents have attacked and how they have attacked them. Your partner, in summary, is going to pick parts of your case and rebuild them. If your partner, in summary, doesn't know the attacks that have been made on your case, they won't know how to rebuild them. So that's what your job is, in summary, is to make those attacks really clear so your partner knows what to deal with. And then finally, the grand crossfire. This one is, I think, to deal with the other team's attacks on the thing you're going for. But this, whatever it is you're kind of choosing in to focus on, focus the grand crossfire on that. Ideally, you want to try and keep this fairly calm, but that is sort of the last opportunity you have to ask questions about the thing you're going to go for. All right, go and do questions.